Well, I married the right person, but as a whole, I met an undocumented Mexican immigrant who has a 10th grade education and was the oldest boy and had to go to work and take care of his family. And when I was 22 years old, and he's been my life partner for 37 years. He is the kindest, most responsible, loving, solid human anyone could ever be with. What's kind of interesting is if you actually look at historically, most of our United States presidents all grew up, I think all of them, at one point it was all of them, grew up in families with an alcoholic parent. And so there are personality types that, you grow up in those tough situations, but it ends up making you really strong. And it's just amazing to think that we carry this around no matter how powerful you think someone is. Everybody has something.
Welcome back to Be Anomalous, the podcast with the misfits, the trailblazers, the cultural disruptors, and anyone bold enough to carve their own path. I'm Sai Menon, and today's guest is Julie Castro Abrams, founder of How Women Lead, a venture fund and leadership network dedicated to getting more women into boardrooms, into investing, and into the rooms where decisions get made. Julie has spent her entire career at the intersection of justice work and business, from microfinance and poverty alleviation to running her own venture firm and helping move women's representation on public company boards from 10% to 34% in just 12 years. But what struck me more than anything in this conversation is who Julie is beyond her titles. She's a grandmother, she's been a foster parent. She's been married to an undocumented Mexican immigrant for 37 years. She's someone who actually lives the value she talks about, and that comes through every minute of this conversation. We go deep on identity, power, white privilege, immigrant founders, co-founder mistakes, venture capital, and what it really means to let your light shine. Trust me, you don't want to miss this episode. So let's get into it. Welcome to Be Anomalous, Julie. This is one of the most exciting interviews for me. I've been waiting for this. So before we dive in, please introduce yourself without, oh my God, you have achieved so much. But before all that, who is Julie?
I'm Julie Castro Abrams, and I'm going to tell you some interesting things because you can look at my resume and that's one thing, but I grew up in a middle-class family and actually grew up Catholic. And I'm not anymore. I'm not practicing any religion. I'm confused about whether or not I think there is even any bigger spirit and whatever. But I actually believed it all. And so in my, and everybody else I felt like was a hypocrite, right? So I actually made a commitment. I was to spend my life caring for other people and giving away my worldly goods thing. So like that's how my life has been set up. So I studied human development and social policy, so I could think about how do you really impact inequity and justice in the world. For my undergrad, I got a master's in social work and an MBA from the University of Chicago for graduate school because I wanted to figure out like how do I really get all the very best academic background to be able to have impact in the world. So that really is my raison d'etre, is like how do I take the white privilege, educational privilege, upper middle class growing up privilege, and activate that in the world. And I've lived a really different kind of life than you would normally see for someone who ends up running a venture firm and having a network of corporate women, right? Because I started that way, and I hope it's not the same for you today, but I thought I had to make a binary choice in my life partner. So how people read that Lean In book and they talk, part of it is like marry the right person. Well, I married the right person, but as a whole, I met an undocumented Mexican immigrant who has a 10th grade education and was the oldest boy and had to go to work and take care of his family. And when I was 22 years old, and he's been my life partner for 37 years. He is the kindest, most responsible, loving, solid human anyone could ever be with. And we have been foster parents. We have had 2 biological children. We put a Rwandan woman through college. She's been with our family for 16 years. Like we really live a life of giving to others and having impact, social impact in my day job as well as my lifetime. So, and I'm a grandma. I have a two-month old baby
Wow.
that we literally moved to be by our granddaughter and my daughter and her husband. And, 5 o'clock every morning, I go over there and I take 3 or 4 hours and help so my daughter can go back to
Oh
sleep.
my
So,
God, it's so beautiful.
so I have I mean, it has not always been easy, but I have a beautiful life. I get to have impact and care for people in every day of my life. So whether it's my children or the other kids and people we've cared for, or it's in my daily work. So it's pretty beautiful, good
Oh
stuff.
my God, that is some intro, Julie.
It's different than the like I studied and I was McKinsey
Yeah,
consultant. No, I started my career doing a strengths-based approach to poverty alleviation, where I worked at a music conservatory for low-income children, and the whole concept is you have a child who's grown up with really been dealt a tough hand, but they're a violinist when they're in this room, and they're the Juilliard potential, and they're it
yeah,
changes when and then I worked in microfinance and micro enterprise and helped low income women start their own businesses. When you put on a different hat, when you say I'm the CEO, when really people think of you the domestic violence survivor, right? Like
yeah,
that's a whole transformation of your self-assessment and how others respond to you. If
yeah,
you introduce yourself as I'm the CEO of my own company, even if it's, you and a part-time person, right?
yes.
Um, that's or if I'm a violinist that I'm hoping to go to Juilliard, like people think about you differently than if you start with your deficit. So, and I think that was really a poverty alleviation strategy early on. But now in my life, I still carry that frame, even when I work with a woman who's, thinking about going on a public board or on a public board and thinking about being the chair of a public board. So much of what we have to do is shed old identities and step into new ones and decide and try it on and decide I'm going to embody this. Because, that imposter syndrome thing, you can use different language for it. Some people hate those words, but it's real. Like, how
Yeah.
do you get out of your own self-definition that women carry around? Cultural definitions are pretty damaging. How do you move beyond those and really try on another one for size?
So, how did you kind of move on from that? Like you mentioned that your background is anything but, you know, uh, conventional, but you moved on from that to who you are today. And like
Yeah.
understanding all of this, it's not from a Catholic background. Where was the first kind of question that you had that this is not something that, like, you wanted to question this?
Oh, I think I've always questioned this. To be honest, as much as it sounds like I had all the privilege in the world, my mom, I grew up in a home with some alcoholism, let's put it that way.
Okay.
And so, and when you're an adult child of an alcoholic, you look back and you see these personality traits. And one of them is I was the challenger. I was like, this doesn't make sense. This is irrational. I had sisters that were the peacemaker or the denier or the whatever. Like you have these
Yeah.
personalities that out of a family like that. What's kind of interesting is if you actually look at historically, most of our United States presidents all grew up, I think all of them, at one point it was all of them, grew up in families with an alcoholic parent. And so there are personality types that you grow up in those tough situations, but it ends up making you really strong. You have to see the world in a different way just to survive through that growing up. So I'm a I'm always challenging every minute of the day.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about shedding your identity. What was the
Yeah.
first thing that you had to kind of learn through that process?
What's kind of interesting is honestly, when I went to school at Northwestern, I remember going to this class, and I think it was just like about, you know, African American history or something, or something. There was a really important African American professor, and boy, did he say, check your white privilege. Like he kept pointing it out. I can't even
Mm,
remember if it was to me personally, but or just the group, and I
mm,
felt it so personally. But I just remember like this, like, oh, I better really, because I emotionally wanted to be there, but I was grew up a white person in Iowa
yeah,
with nobody brown around me. So I had to actually learn like the words I'm saying are from my own white privilege, or the whatever, or I'm not your savior just because I'm over here,
Mm.
providing a resource, or when you go to graduate school of social work, well, at least at University of Chicago, when I was there, I remember like one of the very first days, they basically said, listen, if you're going into this work, and I think some people hear social work and they think that means somebody who's like sitting in their office deciding on your benefits. Social work means anything that's working in justice work, whether it's clinical work directly with someone like as a therapist, or it's running a music conservatory, right? It's like a whole
Yeah.
breadth of anything that does justice work. But one of the things they said is, don't expect people to thank you. And
Mm.
it's a really interesting thing because a lot of people go into these helping professions and they're just they're emotionally, they don't say it, but inside
Yeah.
of you, you think like, I want to be thanked. And so that's one of the first things is like, they know you're getting paid, or they know you have privilege and power over them. So
Oh,
think about this. You think you don't have the power because you're working in a nonprofit, not making a lot of money. But the reality is you have power in whether or not they get into the class, or they get that grant, or they get the whatever, right? And
yeah.
that is a position that is fraught with all kinds of complexity. And we all know power corrupts. And you watch
Mm.
people who get so imbued with that sense of power that
Yeah.
really go to a bad place. And so I've carried some of those things with me for so long, which is like, if you're going to do good in the world and you're going to do something to help other people, you're doing it without any expectation of anything back.
Yeah.
And in fact, you should know that they they may or may not even hold you in any high esteem. Like they may
And I
they
think
may
that's the
feel like,
hardest thing.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
an interesting thing. And this idea that I mean, everybody gets something out of every interaction. I get an emotional boost every time I help someone else out, whether they thank me or acknowledge that I did anything along the way or not. And if you get crushed, if they don't thank you, then you're in the wrong business.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, you talk about the white privilege, and I feel like most people don't understand. And when I was in college too, I feel like that conversation never happened because people don't really get the privilege that they come from, because like you mentioned, emotionally it's a different state. Like, oh, but your life is better now, like why are you complaining, or those kind of questions. So there was never an
We
open
should be so
conversation.
grateful to be in the
Yeah.
United States as an immigrant, or whatever the baloney is,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
And I always feel like people shy away from these
yeah,
conversations. And the only way we can actually get better is by conversation. So I
yeah,
always wondered that.
yeah,
But like you, that's very rare that people actually understand
yeah,
that. Has
yeah.
it changed over the years as you've seen more and more people go through that, like in an emotion, especially even your spouse now, seeing that, like what he faces versus what you face?
Oh, I mean, I think it's always evolving. I mean, literally this year, I'm married to a Mexican immigrant. He's 66 years old. He is skinny old guy, and he's really sweet and shy, and his English is only okay if he trusts you and he feels safe. And so he came to the United States when he was 30. He wasn't, he'd come here as a 10-year-old. He wasn't planning on staying until he met me. He was just visiting. And so so he has a tremendous amount of fear, and I have fear for him, but his fear has been paralyzing. It's changed our whole life. This fear that, I mean, he's a citizen, but it doesn't matter. Watching immigration enforcement that has been so violent and wrong in the
Yeah.
way we've implemented it this year has really frozen my family. And so I'm living with it and watch every day. And in fact, I go on my own journey from like, come on, we can go on that trip, and he's terrified to go to the airport. Like I go from having great empathy and wanting to protect him to being a little bit aggravated because it's disrupting my own white privilege plan. And so like, living with somebody who's experiencing that, or we've had times where he's, and I have a Rwandan daughter, right? And so like he'll be like, can you just go up to that register or whatever in whatever store or whatever? He's like, because they always give me a hard time. Can you just go please do this? Because it's not safe for me, or it just feels like it's easier if you go talk to them. Or my Rwandan daughter, I'm like, oh, let's go for a walk over here. And she's like, I don't like to walk over there. People look at me weird. I don't feel safe because they look at me like I don't belong. Let's walk over there in the neighborhood, right? And so it's just like all I feel like I experience that constantly through someone else that I love, through somebody else's eyes. I'm like, oh my God. Like I walk through this world not having any fear, worries. And as a middle-aged white woman with great English and education and some, wealth, I feel like I can do anything without having those feelings of like, you know what, like that's not safe for me.
So you spoke about power and corruption, right? But how do you associate women with power? And now that you have it, how have you seen it shift in the way that people perceive you and how you perceive it?
Well, it's an interesting question. Power is on a spectrum. Like we all have some little power over something. So I don't know that I don't have all the power. I have some power, maybe more than I did. And when I think about it, sometimes it surprises me. People will be like, "Oh, oh, you have," and I'm just like, I'm just a social worker. And then people are like, Julie, don't say that because like you're so much more and you do actually like don't deny it because then it feels fake and I'm like, okay, fine. I didn't realize I was doing that, right? But I feel like even like I just had this I have this program going on right now for public company board directors. Because some of our board members that are it said, we need a safe place just for women to talk about becoming the chair, or if you're the chair of the board, how do you handle some of those things? And I'm talking about this because these are the most powerful women I know. And we had this weekend retreat, and I realized every single one of those women walked into that weekend retreat feeling the not enoughness, which is just crazy for you and I, right? So we look at these
Yeah.
women and we're like, why would you ever feel that way? But we started on Friday night. We did an inventory of like, we kind of did a who's here. Okay, how many of you have experienced a shareholder takeover? How many of you, and
Mm.
everybody had tons of experience, right? But by the next morning, I could feel it, and we did a little, box breathing meditative thing, and I was like, I want every one of you to know, like, you are here for a reason. You're meant to be here. We chose you to be here. You're supposed to, like, you're right, and you have a lot to contribute. And people came up to me later and they're like, thank you for saying that. I really needed to hear that. And
Mm.
it's just amazing to think that we carry this around no matter how powerful you think someone is. Everybody, everybody has something.
Mm.
And what's interesting for me when you think about women, and maybe to share something that I just I've when I talk to some people, they're like, well, actually, men in my life have given me more introductions, more mentoring, and more opportunities than women. And in fact, some women have hurt their career progression or they've been negative to them. And I think when you interrogate that a little bit, you know, in order to survive in an environment that was designed by and for white men, let's just talk
Mm.
about the current environments, right? Um, you actually need to put on it's a code shift moment. You actually have to kind of be like them or you can't survive in that environment, right?
Mm.
But you can't be a white man. So you have to kind of then also walk the line of how do I do it a la woman, a la man. The
Mm.
people who are older than I am in particular, they they over indexed often and they acted more patriarchal than the men, because they couldn't be just in their own skin, so they overcorrected, and sometimes that meant they had sharp elbows and they weren't very nice to the other women, or they acted like power and opportunities was pie and that there wasn't enough to go around. And so it's just interesting to think I have so much compassion for people because it's like, you know it is brutal to be the only woman in a room and try to um, be heard.
Yeah.
Literally, unless there's three people who are others, women's voices don't get heard in a boardroom, for example. We've documented that well. Like, if you're the only woman on a public company board, we know that their tenures are shorter and they're less likely to get leadership roles and less likely to be heard in the boardroom. So, in general, you've just it had to do so many gymnastics, and ultimately you're not fully being your authentic self. You had to try and be somebody else, almost like you were evolving into this other undefined role, because there's not a
Mm.
definition of how do you be a woman in the 90% male environment. Like, it's just, there's you're reading cues all around you and trying to figure out where to stand. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I don't remember exactly where I heard, but because there's less, like, you think that there's that one seat, so
Yeah.
women feel like they're all fighting for that one seat, so they kind of like don't support each other, but they try to fight for that one
Yeah.
seat.
Yeah.
But think of it like
As
increasing the
opposed to
number of
coming
seats.
together and saying, let's make 3 seats. Like, let's
Exactly.
make it
Yeah.
5, right?
Yeah.
But that's hard to do when you're trying to survive. And frankly, I mean, I think about it, I'm like, when you're trying to raise a family, um, do more than your share at work, walk this fine line, the likability penalty line of, like, be likable, but not too likable, because then you're everybody's mother, all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
The reality is, it's almost been an impossible road, and nobody could do it without scars and bruises and some mistakes along the way of how you behaved when you just try to,
Yeah.
try to show up in these environments. So this is the thing. I have another kind of privilege, Sai. I've never worked for a man in my life. I've been the CEO of my own thing since I was 32. So the truth is, I can study, and through my own relationships and observations as well, understand people. I've had the privilege of being able to not have to build the muscle of how to work with in these patriarchal structures in the same way. It's not like I don't have any of it because I'm living in this culture, but I create female environments.
Yeah.
So it's just different.
What advice would you have for people in those rooms and women who are struggling to create that voice and not get into that, um, you know, rat race
Yeah.
of trying to,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
put each other down?
Well,
Because sometimes I feel like they don't even realize it.
this is the thing, like, I can give you what I've observed and learned, but with all the humility of saying, and I'm not in your seat. I haven't done it, probably, and I've done my own version of something, but, like, without having ever walked in your shoes, I'll tell you what I have witnessed. One, you need to give yourself grace. Women are told you have to run, 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 be perfect, be all the things. And it's not a reasonable expectation for yourself or anybody else. So, first, just be kind to yourself and take a deep breath, and also keep checking in with, who do I want to be? What are the values I want to show up with in the world? And if you haven't defined that, it's, you're gonna get whipsawed. You're gonna flap in the wind. You got to decide who you are and try to stay in integrity with that. And a good executive coach is a good partner and friend for you, because one of the things they do is they hold up a mirror and they ask you a question like, what are the other ways you could evaluate this situation? Or are there any other options of where you should go next? Because sometimes you think there's only one way to handle something. The reality is, if you stop and take a deep breath, you're like, well, in fact, I could do this under these circumstances. So I do think just being in your head and trying to race through life and survive through it, it's hard to do without ever having anyone helping you hold up a mirror. But I think the other piece of that is, my first CEO job, they taught me a couple interesting lessons. One was, she's like, you feel it in your body before your brain can define what's happening. So we all know, if you really stop and think, I hold my tension, my stomach gets a little upset, or my shoulders start to bunch up. Something happens in your body when you're triggered, or you are feeling in misalignment. And if you work in a male dominated environment, you're probably feeling it all the time. You're probably feeling with some frequency. So, and you're denying it. You're just not white knuckling it through. And so I would just encourage people to really think about, like, do some practice with an executive coach or someone where you can figure out, do you have a couple of those, like, intervention things that you can have, like, take a deep breath, box breathe. Am I feeling something in my body that is, and then because your head takes a minute to catch up of why you're feeling this. You just react because you got to get through the day. You don't have time to evaluate everything. But your body certainly knows. And by the end of the day, you're like, why am I so exhausted? Or why is I need a massage. My shoulders are killing me. Well, it's because you were like this all day because you were fight or flight, right? So yeah, I think those are important practices to really, and you know what? Be kind with yourself. I don't know if you've ever read or heard Deepa Parashathian's work, the one, the few, the only. It's all about. So she was a Indian woman, worked at Deloitte for 25 years, and got sick. And then she looks around and she's like, "Wait, it's not just me." So of course, as a good consultant does, she researched the heck out of it, and she really realized that women of color were getting sick working in corporate environments because of the constant code shifting, and of course every Indian is different, but there's some Indian women I know who are like, yeah, you layer on not just the like working in a male dominated environment, blah, 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 but then also the family pressure of you have to be this person at home and this person, and then you have to code shift all throughout the day at work, right? And so the pressures of identity shifting and not enoughness and meeting family requirements can just be extraordinary. And every culture, most cultures have a version of that, right? It's different for everybody. And in fact, I invested in a company for Asian women, and one Indian and one Chinese American woman are the ones who founded it. And it's a mental health AI solution helping mental health providers understand how do you really work with Asian women on their mental health, because so many people grow up with both family definitions of mental health and what it can and can't be, cultural and familial, and then also the impact of family and culture on your mental health, and how do you process it, and if you say to people from certain cultures like just tell them no, you're like, well, I can't really just tell my mother-in-law no.
Yeah.
So I mean, some of that stuff, like it's it's a landmine. You gotta.
Yeah, it is. Oh my God. That's so interesting. What is the name of the company?
Anise Health.
Anise.
ANISE. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, it is an actual problem.
It is. Think about your code switching all day long, right? And you think about privilege, right? An immigrant privilege. You are the model minority and you have like an English accent. So you have this Indian, American sort of privilege, if you will, if you ask me, right? Very different than like if you had a Spanish accent, a Mexican accent, right? And so like we all just are walking in all this dynamism, and we carry around with us guilt and like my Rwandan daughter and her partner, like he went to Harvard. She's a mechanical engineer. They're the only and the best in the family. They're the best and the brightest, if you will. You know what I mean? And the pressure for them to give back to family, but then but they tell them you're not Rwandan anymore, but they're not American. So what are they? Right? Like the complexity of being an immigrant and working in the United States is also a whole other layer of stuff.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I always feel that way. Like I'm an Indian, but I grew up in Oman, and then now I moved to the US. So it's just like.
So what are you?
Exactly.
You're a multi-identity person.
And I mean, the world sees you in different ways, but then, it's just like, who am I? And it just. Well, there's huge Kenyan populations of Indian immigrants from Kenya, so they didn't grow up in India, but they're Indian, but they're Kenyan, but now they're American, and then they marry the white guy. Oh, wow. And there's always this pressure of sort of fitting in whatever culture. So
you didn't think this conversation was going to go in this direction, did you?
No, I'm like, I cannot believe that you get it so much. Like, it's so unheard of or unnatural for me to be able to have this conversation with someone like you who gets it, like who understands. Like I said, I've never been able to have this conversation with someone who understands that to that level, because it's
Well,
always,
I understand something. I can't understand
yeah, but you
your real
still
identity
feel it,
and your
right? Like
how
when you
you walk in the
accept
world.
it,
But
even being able to accept that is something that is
yeah,
very, uh, like to be able to hear out, and you
yeah,
are listening to it. You're willing to open up and try to understand, even though you're
yeah,
not in a position,
yeah,
is really rare. And I feel
yeah,
like more women or more people should be able to do that.
yeah.
So that
You
would
know,
be
when George Floyd was murdered, I think this is really when it got to a peak. There were all these articles and even books about white privilege and stuff, and it was kind of an interesting thing. There was somebody who was like, "Oh, let's get a group of women together and." From the How Women Lead community, which is half women of color and half white women. But let's get a bunch of white women together and talk to them about white privilege. And it was an interesting thing because this was coming from a black woman. And it was like, this how do you bring people together to say you need to be better? And who can they hear? And how do you evolve in your own journey about understanding white privilege? It's complicated. Like
yeah.
I was young. I was in my 20s, and I brought a black woman who is like really magnificent. I admired her. She and I had worked together previously, to come to talk to this team about D&I and privilege. And it was interesting though. There was somebody on that staff, a white woman, who I thought she was more evolved than she was. I don't know. I didn't think this was going to come out. She was like, "I have black friends," and she sort of started with it. It was
Oh,
like weird, hyper defensive, and it derailed the whole day.
mm,
The energy was so intense, and this woman was not capable or prepared of doing anything besides ultimately making this woman feel shame. And the
mm,
complexity of that has stuck with me
yeah,
because the sort of white savior thing is
yeah,
really real. And it comes from a good place, but it also is not. You got to interrogate it and figure out, like, come on, like that actually also is in many ways ultimately damaging.
yeah, it is. And I
Yeah,
think it's also coming, like, I think people take it personally, and you should take the personal out of it and think, because
yeah,
everyone has implicit bias, everyone has
yeah,
subconscious bias. It's
yeah,
all like, even you don't realize it, but till
yeah,
you understand and recognize those and are able to fix it, it's hard
yeah,
to, even
yeah,
be able to solve anything.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Complicated. Well, and as human beings, we're we're all on our own evolution journey. What's
Yeah.
been so hard or eye-opening about the last year, especially last couple of years, is you're like, oh, these one, the election happened and you look around, you're like, was it you? Was it you? Was it you? I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, I'm a very left-leaning justice person. And then watching the people like, oh, were you just waiting for permission to let your racism out? Like, what is this about?
Yeah.
Like, and are you just lacking courage, and that's why you immediately folded and said we're getting all the D&I language off of everything that we do?
Oh my God.
Ultimately, not a single lawsuit. I mean, every single person who's bucked the administration is won. Anytime the administration that so all the law firms that bent and committed $1 billion worth of pro bono legal support for the Trump administration, they were so weak, and now they all realize all the other law firms that went against it won in court. And
Mhm.
so what is that about? Were you really just looking for the excuse to fall on that,
Yeah.
the racist bandwagon? Were you never really into the DNIs? Like, Mark
Yeah.
Zuckerberg report. I'm just saying what's in the news. So this is not
Yeah.
me knowing anything about anything, but like he was like, oh, we're going to masculinize the culture at Facebook. It's like, what is that about? What are
Mhm.
you talking about?
Do you feel like we're going backwards in this, like in the
Uh,
last few years?
well, we clearly are going backwards in certain ways of implementation of things. I have my days when I'm optimistic and days when I'm pessimistic. There's certainly days when like today, it's Monday morning, so I'm feeling more optimistic. I actually feel like this might be the last gasp of a cultural reset. And the reality is you almost had to hit that wall because our this reality TV show with the Kardashians and all this all this suggestion that we should all be striving towards looking plastic and it's all about the money and nothing else matters. That is not sustainable or good for anybody. Nobody's happy living a life trying to be the wealthiest and the most beautiful. That is an empty goal in life. And everybody's been participating in that, right? And we've all allowed our food system to be destroyed, the monopolies that are around, like, show me a person who doesn't order on Amazon all the time. Like, so, and myself included, like, so let's do a reset about our morals and values and how we want to live our lives. Do we want to care for other people? My example to you at the beginning of this conversation of, my family, I have to tell you, I feel such honor that we've been able to care for so many people in our lives and bring them into our home. And I know a lot of people who've worked really hard and in environments that weren't great for them, and they've made a lot of money and they have multiple homes, and that is not a recipe for happiness ultimately. You need to be able to have some, success at work in order to feel happy, but that's not the only part of life.
How has success changed for you over the years? That you've seen successful women behind scenes, and also personally you were successful. How has that definition for your own personal journey changed for you?
I just think more and more at this stage in my life, I'm just so grateful that I was able to begin and live my entire life with a commitment to integrity and values. I'm just so grateful I've never crossed a line, and that I have, and I'm really just super clear. Success to me now means I am very clear about where my values are. I don't want you in my community, in my life, if you're mean to other women, if you tear down other people, if you're not, everybody's a racist somewhere, but if you're not on a journey and working towards, anti-hate, I don't want that in my life. And I've been able to actually craft my life so that I get to be clear about what my values are and unapologetic. I don't work for anybody else anymore. I run stuff myself. And the beauty of that, especially when you're my age, is like, and I'm going to do it aligned with the values and the things that I think are important.
You've been in rooms where there have been fundraising and then so many powerful women.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've seen behind the scenes, especially for fundraising, that people understand for women?
Well, okay. So we can read all the reports, right?
Yeah.
Men are asked promotion questions, women are asked prevention questions. And they talk about that a lot. There's a lot of research articles on this for founders. So the guys are asked, how big can this become a $1 billion company? And the women are asked, are you sure this is the right provider of technical development, whatever, like, they're really asked, like, how risk, and are you going to get pregnant, and the really horrible egregious stuff is they're asked, right? But if you step back and think about fundraising in general, because I raise money for our venture fund, when somebody starts asking me, oh, well, or they'll say something like, oh, we only invest in people whose team has been together for this amount of time. And like, they start to give you all these like bars to reach, and you'll be like, oh, well, that's great, because everybody on my team's basically been with me for 5 or 6 years. Then there's another hurdle. And it's almost like you can almost tell that they're just looking for something to say no to you on. And it's like, you know what? And not everybody has that privilege, but I'm like, I'm not going to follow up with these people. This is not the right group. I don't, they're other people are like, oh, I'm really excited about your mission. Let me figure out how I can make it happen. I really believe what you're saying, that the data is clear. Women founders return more for their investors.
Yeah.
If you don't believe that, and some people don't, from the minute you get on a call, they're like, well, where's this research study from? The meeting's over. Like I might
Mm.
as well just say thank you for your 5 minutes. Let's hop off this Zoom call, because the reality is somebody who puts up too many barriers isn't there. Corporate women operators, women who've made their own money, they get it. They believe it because they've seen it. They know how they've worked. They know other powerful women. They know a woman, in order to be able to get to a Series A or Series B fundraising as a founder, they know this person has got the chops. You can just feel it. And so, and she's got a PhD and she's already had a startup. Like, come on.
Mm.
Those women will make a decision to invest in minutes. Outside of institutions, I was just giving you the example. If I look at women who have an inherited wealth or married into wealth, nobody's one type of person, right? But I'm going to make a generalization. My experience is often the fear and my husband says women don't really start venture backable businesses. The minute someone starts to say that stuff to me also, I'm like, oh, I can't argue with someone who's not in the room. Like,
Mm.
it's very, it's like,
You can't
hey,
teach.
listen, like it sounds to me like this might not be the right thing for you. That's what I do. Or someone starts, in a distrustful way, pushes me too hard, asks me too many questions in a way. It's sort of like, I don't think this clearly this is making you nervous. And I think maybe it's not the right time.
Yeah.
I just let people move on because like, I don't want, I've got 600
Yeah.
investors in my funds. I don't want someone who's going to constantly doing gotcha or, questioning everything. Like you either are in it or you're not.
I think because there's so less funding for women, they get into that desperation of being able to say yes to
Yeah,
anything.
I know.
And I've been advised um, to like, why don't you take a male with you, take your husband for fundraising so that it'll be easier. And I was just so against it but I've seen people do that and I've been advised.
Oh,
Yeah, I've seen people.
we only invest in companies founded by women with no
Yeah,
male co-founders. And every single one of them was told at some point, often by another woman, it's
yeah,
easier to fundraise if you have a guy by your side. And the truth is, the data suggests that's true.
yeah,
That said, as an investor, it is not good that 3 years from now, the minority co-founder, if you will, the person who's not the primary, you're the owner of the
yeah,
idea and the mission, that person will often, once the rocket ship happens and the money shows up, they're like, well, I had more to do with this than,
yeah,
and then a lawsuit happens because you got to get them out.
yeah,
Or the male VCs see Joe. He was the reason why they invested in the first place. And they're like, well, Sai, it was a nice idea you had, but Joe's the growth guy. Let's let Joe run with it. Joe
yeah,
may not have anything to do with, corporate growth or go to market or anything, but the bias in people's minds really. So you have failed companies, you have lawsuits, you have founders that are the real owner of the IP and the ideas exit. It just gets really messy. So in your gut, if it feels uncomfortable, listen to that. Don't, because you're going to resent it the whole way along. I can't believe I had to bring this guy in to get, raise money for this. But I don't fault anyone for doing that because it's just the reality. So, I hope you don't have to, I hope anybody listening to this doesn't have to go there. But if you do, like, I understand it,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
It's unfortunate though.
It's
That's why
unfortunate.
I'm
Yeah,
trying to drive capital. Women founders or women investors, I want all women to be investing in venture so
yeah.
that we can fuel this frankly
Industry.
burgeoning industry. There were only 12 women run venture funds in 2010 and today we have 380. So it's a new market and we
Yeah,
need to fuel the strength in this market. I'm also trying to make sure we can address systems problems where major institutional investors who think it's safer to go with, some of these old, white institutions,
yeah,
helping them understand like that isn't safety.
yeah,
But people won't criticize you if you invest in Sequoia and they fail because
yeah.
Sequoia is a brand.
Wow.
So I get it why people will only recommend these major institutions that have been around forever, but they're not making that much more. They're not really making the big wins for you as an LP, limited partner in those funds.
On that note, what is the difference that you've seen successful founders, especially women, have done versus the ones they couldn't make it?
Well, I think the most successful founders I know, one, they've generally already run a startup before. They're a second time founder or more, because you have to know so much. I also feel like if you've worked, the data says if you're 50 years old, you're going to be more successful than 22-year-old. And that's not what your bias is telling you, because you
Yeah.
think it's a 22-year-old guy in a hoodie that's going to be the successful entrepreneur. That's not what the data says, actually. So, but we don't always believe data. We believe our gut and our cultural bias. But you as a founder need to both be optimistic and dogged, and you're going to get up at 4 a.m. and borrow your brother's truck or do whatever you need to do. So that grit, willing to do whatever, is by definition the way women are, because you have no choice, right? And immigrants are amazing founders and entrepreneurs, because you've already shown, if you're an immigrant by your choice in your lifetime, you're like, well, I took a risk of coming to a new country, building I'm a courageous risk taker by definition if I'm an immigrant. So, someone who's going to do whatever it takes. I'll give you an example. One of our founders, PhD from MIT in genetics. She started a diagnostics company, and no one would invest in her. So you know what she did? She went out and she won 35 pitch competitions to fund the startup of her company. Do you think that young woman is going to bend when she doesn't get around to fundraising? She'll figure it out, and that's the thing, is like, that's who you want to back, is that person's going to figure it out no matter what. Of course, you can say, oh, you want somebody who's, a technical founder or this kind of founder. But the reality is, when people say that stuff to me, I'm like, that's pretty simplistic. Yeah, sure. It's great if they have the technical background. But the truth is, if they've run stuff and they know how to build a coalition and get good advisors and inspire their team, and they know how to manage finances, those are all really important things as well. But as long as you know how to bring in people to, that complement what you know how to do.
On that point, like, what are the mistakes that people have made in terms of finding the right co-founder? Because I think one of the biggest startup failures is co-founder disputes, right?
It's one of the biggest. And so I wouldn't say you always need a co-founder, because I had to remove a co-founder from partnering with me on something once. So, and that was very expensive, and that person did not bring real value. So it was like, ugh, that was an expensive mistake. So a co-founder needs to be someone who is complementary. Like, let's say you are the technical person and they're the salesperson, and the combo is great, right? But you guys need to be really clear what value do each of you bring, and neither one of you can be thinking, well, my value is greater than the other person. You have to really appreciate and trust each other. And you also both need to be in it for the long haul. It does happen with a lot of frequency that 4 years in, someone's like, you know what, I want to do something else. I can't handle the insecurity of a startup environment. There's all kinds of stuff that happens along the way for people. And, who really is the main owner, and that person should have more ownership stakes as a co-founder. 50-50 is really tough.
Oh, that is such important advice. I feel like that was one of the mistakes, because sometimes you always rely so much on this other person, and when they leave, you just like lost. I recently read your article, which was, I think, day before, about strength.
Yeah.
And it so resonated with me. It was such a beautiful article. How has that definition changed for you for strength, and how you view strength for yourself?
Well, I think when I was younger, strength meant being able to do more than anybody else, faster, better, smarter. Now it's the strength of riding through the crazy times, and people's and really, like, nobody's perfect. Figuring out where to put that bar. I don't know that I figured this out. So it changes every day. Like, you want to hold the bar high for other people, but I never, honestly, because I'm often faster, smarter, better than a lot of people, and I just have a different capacity than a lot of people. I never know where to hold the bar. So understand, sometimes I'm like, I hold the bar too low because I'm like, well, I can't expect them to do what I can do. But then on the other hand, it's like,
Yeah.
you got to hold the bar high for them. You can't estimate what someone should give. So I don't know. I'm on my journey with it, I think, but emotional resilience, being able to inspire people, being really clear the role that culture and values plays. And then, as at this stage, I've hired and fired hundreds of people. And being able to say to someone, hey, listen, like, you have tremendous skills in this way, but I don't think it doesn't feel like this is a great fit for you. And is
Yeah.
this really where, is this really where you're getting joy and feeling like you can grow, and being able to have those conversations without it feeling like over energied, you
Yeah.
know, uh, yeah.
Yeah.
uh,
I, that's such an interesting point that you bring up, like about hiring and firing, and those are hard things for women because they
yeah.
always, um,
We want to mother everybody. We want to take care
yeah,
of everybody. We never want to be the mean person. But the
yeah,
reality is, you're not. The first time, this might, it wasn't the first time I fired. So one of the first times I became the CEO of a thing, and my EA was horrible. She was the worst EA ever, and but she was really sweet. I liked her a lot, and so it was really challenging. So at some point, it was like, I can't work with you. This isn't going to work. So 2 years later, I go to this restaurant and I see her at the restaurant. I'm like hiding. I'm like, and she
oh,
actually finds me and comes up to me and she's like, I want to thank you. You fired me from that EA job, and I'm now a massage therapist. I own my own massage studio, and I've got people who work me, and I'm so happy. She's like, I never would have been happy sitting in a desk being an EA. And that
oh,
really had an impact on me because it was like, yeah, sometimes there's dissonance, like it's just not the right fit for you, and you
yeah,
should go be a massage therapist. And she makes good money doing that, more than she would have made as my EA anyway. And like,
yeah,
like we all have our things, right? And when
yeah,
you're young, you're still trying to find it sometimes. So if it doesn't feel, if there's a disconnect, sometimes it's like, well, how would you be best deployed? Where should we put you?
yeah.
you know
What are like, what advice would you have for founders who are trying to build that team? And sometimes I feel like they get into the race of trying to, maybe hire the wrong people.
Well, this is the thing. When you're a founder, it's not like you're like, well, I can pay you market rate, and
Mm,
therefore, I can expect this thing from you. And so figuring out how to bring in a team that's high quality, and that can do the work, but also is willing to do a lot of it on the equity upside. That you have to be really charismatic and compelling with your mission and who you are as a leader, and that they want to come to work with you, when it's not, you're not really able to pay them what they might be worth in the other parts of the market, right? And
yeah,
so how do finding people that are, um, who really are motivated by the growth of the startup and the future potential outcome, and creating that team environment, we're all building it together for the greater outcome, like that. That takes a certain type of person who's willing to work in that environment. So there are different kinds of startups. You got the seed stage when it's all hopes and dreams, and then you got a series A, series B when you can pay people real money, and then it's a different
yeah.
thing.
What advice in general would you have for even men and women listening to this, um, to, be founders?
Well, if you haven't read the book The Founder's Dilemma, it's super
Mm,
easy, fast read. It's just about like the risk to founders that you will never make any money, or you get fired off your own company, even if the company is successful. So how do you need to understand dilution. You would need to understand how much money you should spend on a team early on and how much equity you should give away. Because in the beginning, you feel like, oh, all I have is equity to give away. But the truth is, if you're not careful and give away too much equity,
Yeah.
then, then investors won't invest in your company because it's too diluted. There's too much dilution. So it's a dance, right?
Yeah.
And you understanding that financial cap table stuff is probably the biggest blind spot I see from people. And I've got a founder right now who's, in the next round, she's going to be under 20%. And most VCs are going to look at that and say, like, your incentives are misaligned. So whether you feel it or not, they're going to judge it.
Yeah.
So setting yourself up so you end with financial results and you don't take on bad money because you're desperate. I mean, you mentioned that earlier, Sai. It's
hard.
it's a thing,
Yeah.
right?
And I think those are the mistakes that you make at early stage, which is really hard to undo later on. And then
It
you
sure
realize,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, oh my God. Julie, this has been such an incredible conversation. What are you excited about now?
Well, I personally believe the fact that women have 54% of the wealth. There's 380 women-run venture firms. I think there's a huge opportunity if we can just get the message out. So thank you for having me on your podcast because I want every woman to know, one, it's a power play to invest in venture capital. It's super fun and great for your career to know the VC landscape, the financing landscape, also to be on the cutting edge of innovation, to see what's out there. And it's also, people are going public much later or never going public. And therefore, the economic growth and real wealth creation happens in the private markets. And if you haven't gotten to the private markets yet, which is what most people, they just put their money in their retirement fund and put it in the public markets, whatever their, advisor says. That's not how you make the big money. You think it's a risk averse strategy, but like right now when the public markets are crashing and flopping all over the place because of the leadership in our country and the global destabilization, you're better off having money in the private market right now today. So you gotta, I want women to get involved in this asset class, and I want to fuel women founders because they're going to return more money for all of us, and they're going to create the innovation you and I need to see. If you're, all of the concerns about both, from whether it's women's health products and solutions for menopause and, et cetera, or, really important, cultures that we're creating. Like you think about, Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg saying we need to masculinize the culture. If Sai was running that company, you wouldn't have that silliness coming out of you wouldn't have broken rungs. Women would be paid equitably, all those things.
Yeah. On that note, we always end with your favorite quote and a favorite book that changed your life.
It's interesting. I know this is probably gonna so there's this book called Forces for Good, and it talks about how do you move a market, how do you move justice forward, and it's pretty simplistic in concept because they studied like the highest impact organizations in the United States, maybe globally, but and it was, if you do policy and systems change work, like you gotta get the structural stuff right. But you can only get that structural stuff right if you've got a movement of people who are behind it. A lot of people singing the same tune about how important it is for women to invest in venture, let's say, and then you do systems change. You educate people, and then you get into the market and invest in companies founded by women. If you do all of those four things, whether it's women on boards or women investing, you can move the market. And women on boards, we were successful in moving from 10% of women's representation on public company boards to 34% in 12
Wow.
years. So massive shift because we did all four of those things collectively. I didn't do anything on my own. I was part of everybody else's efforts. So, so Forces for Good was probably one of the most powerful. And this is probably a quote that I just think resonates for me over and over and everybody else. And Marianne Williamson has this great poem that a lot of people have almost, you think that other people said it, but one of the things she says is, when you let your light shine, you unwittingly give others permission to do the same.
Oh, wow.
So when I say to women, I'm like, hey, be unabashedly visible. And I always say, because my daughter's watching you, you're giving her cues about her, how much power she gets to have by
Yeah.
you stepping into leadership. So yeah, be
Oh my
be
God.
beautiful and bright, and do it for my daughter. So there it is.
Oh my God. That's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Julie. And thank you so much for being so honest and candid and doing this incredible work where I feel like I mentioned before, it's very rare that I see um, people like you being able to do something like this. It's very, very rare. So thank you so much. And
Yeah.
also thank you for, supporting and understanding immigrant founders. Again, that's something that's really, uh, you have to be a person with so much high emotional IQ to be able to understand that, and also to do something about it. Like, it's
Yeah.
understanding is one thing, but you're actually actively doing something about it. And that's more power to you, Julie. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me today. It's been really fun to talk to you.
Thank you.
That was Julie Castro Abrams. If you're not following her work at How Women Lead, please do. You will learn a lot. A few things I'm still thinking about from this conversation is the idea that when you let your light shine, you give others permission to do the same. Then a reminder that shedding an old identity isn't a one time event, it's an ongoing work and it takes time. And Julie's point that women founders return more to their investors and yet still face every barrier imaginable just to get into those rooms. Julie recommended two things before we signed off: the book Forces of Good, if you want to understand how moments actually change systems, and Founder's Dilemma, if you are building something and want to protect yourself from the most common mistakes. Both are worth your time. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. A woman thinking about investing, a founder doubting herself, or honestly anyone trying to figure out who they want to be in this world. If you liked this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. That's how we grow. And let's grow this community together. Until next time, be bold, be real, and be anomalous.